time for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Are oil and gas companies in Canada perpetually the enemy of green energy, fighting a rearguard action? Or can their technology and innovation be a catalyst for more rapid shifts to greener choices? Joining me to discuss a different role for oil and gas companies is Mr. Grant Fagerheim of the Alberta company Whitecap Resources. Grant, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks very much for having me, Tony. I appreciate it.
It's my honor. Maybe just to start us off and make sure the audience knows where you're coming from, what is your vision for energy transition here in Canada?
So first of all, energy transition will take a very long period of time to accomplish, and it will take a lot of investment. Western oil and gas companies, Western Canadian oil and gas producers, support reducing emissions through continuous advancing technologies, including carbon sequestration and storage, low carbon hydrogen production, and methane capture, to name a few. So I personally believe that the move through transition phase, we must firstly have our energy recognized and respected for the current standing we have with regards to environmental stewardship. Canada is known for the most safe and environmentally responsible energy sector in the world for developing its resources. Note that if Canadian energy environmental standards were applied to worldwide production, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by 23%. My vision on a go-forward basis includes all forms of energy, including oil and gas, hydrogen, biofuels, hydro, small nuclear reactors that is being discussed more frequently lately, along with the new but more costly entrants, wind and solar. I do believe that we also need to further develop our minerals and metals that are required for advancing through this long process of energy transition.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on what sort of technology fits into this transition, this green energy space?
Sure. A green recovery cannot ignore, firstly, the practical limitations of governments, including the inabilities to fund longer term. Technologies of all types are advancing quickly in Canada and around the world. Although we must understand that today 80% of the world's energy and electricity comes from fossil fuels. Energy and electricity from oil and gas remains the most cost-effective, most affordable, and reliable source of energy at this time. So we should make everyone aware that the technologies that fit into the green energy category include not only wind and solar, but also hydro, hydrogen, water wave technology. But again, I want to emphasize that the Canadian energy sector has made significant strides in technology improvements with regards to oil and gas production and extraction, which offers the opportunity for Canada to grow its green technology from the energy sector in all those respects.
Are there any areas in particular where Canada is an innovation leader at this point?
There is. Canada definitely demonstrates leadership in extracting oil and gas in the most environmentally responsible manner and is known in that respect throughout the world. As an example, Canadian oil sand emissions, which I'm not an oil sands producer, but the intensity has decreased by 29% since 2000 and is projected to decrease another 23% by 2030. Really quite remarkable and noteworthy. We're also leaders in carbon capture and storage that acts to further enhance additional oil recovery. At Weyburn, Saskatchewan, which we at Whitecap Resources operate, have the largest CO2 sequestration project in the world at this particular time. With regards to natural gas, there's been several different initiatives that are being advanced by the industry that will be talked about in the coming years, including methane recovery, hydrogen production from natural gas, etc.
We've just got 30 seconds before the break, but I just want you to confirm, and then we'll go back to this after the break, but Whitecap itself is either net neutral or net negative. Is that right in terms of your operations?
Yeah, that's correct. In 2019, for example, we sequestered and stored just over 2 million tons of CO2. We actually, from Scope 1 and Scope 2, we produced only 1.4 million tons. So we're a net negative emitter of CO2 at this particular time, and will be again in 2020 as we move forward.
Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, with Mr. Grant Fagerheim. He is the CEO, founder of Whitecap Resources Inc. We're talking about energy transition. I just want to drill down, pardon the pun a little bit, Grant, but drill down a little bit on how Whitecap is net negative. So it's mostly the carbon sequestration technology that you're deploying?
Correct. What we do there's two coal facilities, one in southeast Saskatchewan and one in northern part of North Dakota, that we emit CO2. We sequester that CO2, bring it up into our oil, our large oil pool that we have in southeast Saskatchewan, and we inject it into the ground. It actually assists in breaking more oil away from the rock, and which we sell. We inject 300 million cubic feet a day, and of that, 200 million cubic feet a day of that CO2 is recycled, and we buy about 100 million cubic feet a day of CO2 for reinjection back into the ground. So again, it's just part of the innovation that Canadian energy producers have gone through, and it is a world-class facility. Operation has been studied by most scientists around the world.
This is fascinating because I think what you're seeing here is blending a traditional oil and gas work with basically a green energy agenda. Is that a correct characterization?
Yes, I think it is. It is we'll talk about a blending of the old world with the new world, and I think this transition is an important one. And to be successful when you're blending from old to new, I think it includes a balanced perspective, including energy, the environment, and the economy. As oil and gas products clearly provide the highest level of financial returns, it would be logical that Canadian energy should continue to be one of the key financial engines into the future, which will be fundamental a driver in reducing current government debt burdens and Canadians into the future. From my perspective, we should also consider and include the number of jobs created for all Canadians in advancing Canadian energy, the tax revenue it creates, as well as the revenues from selling our products at international non-discounted prices. These funds will allow us to afford the subsidy funding requirements that advancing new technologies like wind and solar, rather than higher personal and business taxation that is currently being contemplated.
So you see, in terms of meeting the Paris Climate Accord goals and just generally the transition to a different style of economy, you think that this can be done, you're saying, through technology rather than through a carbon tax? Is that what I gleaned from your remark?
Yeah, for certain, we're not. Whether or not we can achieve, it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve the Paris Accord targets, and we've all talked about that. That's been pretty well understood. Mm-hmm. But we can certainly not achieve this through a carbon tax. We will not be able to achieve it. I can definitively say that through a carbon tax. And it's really, I look at that behavior with penalizing behavior. It's like raising your children. You do not get better behavior by penalizing individuals or parties or your kids, nor do you in the business world. But the incentive programs are much more effective with your kids or anyone. So I think that looking to have an incentive program versus a penalizing program, we're not going to get anywhere close to the targets that are being set with an increased carbon tax. Go through energy transition in a methodical manner, including the environment, the economy, and our current energy complex that we're so fortunate to have in Canada, our natural resources. We're so fortunate and blessed to have. It's confusing at times as to why we penalize ourselves as Canadians.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because you're saying that there is hope, maybe not meeting the Paris Accord in the time allotted, but there are things that we can do that aren't necessarily to do with punitive taxes.
what we're certain there is. I mean, this is where we look at from a financial perspective, what can happen, what will happen going forward is going to be dependent upon our behavior and how governments interfere or don't interfere with the what we'll call the resource extraction from and development. We're talking about energy and electricity. What are the best methodologies? What are the most cost-effective? And Canada is somewhat unique in that it has a very large resource base from which to work from, and it should be getting its products to world markets for world prices for the benefit of all Canadians.
Welcome to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Mr. Grant Fagerheim. He is the CEO of Whitecap Resources in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Grant, thank you again for being part of our program.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Thank you, Tony.
Love to get your sense of, given your experience at creating a net negative firm when it comes to carbon emissions and basically being one of the leaders in energy transition, what way can the federal government assist with this transition? What should they be doing?
So I think it's very clear that the federal government can help by removing the regulatory impediments that are in place and assist in the streamlining approval process. The recently approved bills, such as Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, actually impede the progress of infrastructure projects across our country and push timelines out to unacceptable levels for investment time horizons, whether at the national level or internationally. Removing trade barriers between provinces will help make Canada one again with the benefits for all Canadians. But I feel very strongly, firstly, that the federal government can be most helpful to Canadians by restoring investor confidence in Canada, which at this time perhaps is at an all-time low. We need a stable investing environment to attract foreign investment, and I think that is the biggest thing. If they were going to focus on one area of concern, would be investor confidence to bring back investors into our country.
Yeah, so I just want to unpack that just a little bit for our audience. I mean, does that have to do with the fiscal policy of the federal government, or is this more in relation to, as you alluded to, the time it takes to get new projects approved? What sort of thing has to change?
So I think that it is, first of all, I would put timelines for approval. When we talk about getting approval of major projects in our country at this particular time, it takes an inordinate amount of time relative to our counterparts around the world, whether it's in the U.S., Europe, the Middle East, and all projects that are being developed around the world. Its timelines are protracted and long, and the outcome is not well known. That leads us to the second component, which is obviously is the what we'll call the fiscal responsibility. Those that invest in projects, infrastructure projects, or any projects, need a return to the money of the monies they invest. And we've demonstrated that we're not what we'll call a stable or consistent regulatory environment. So in order to attract foreign investment, we really need to focus on a more consistent, stable investing platform from which to invest and get a proper return.
Grant, I always like to try to make sure that we get down to as a focus to the person, the worker, and the jobs. What do you see as the future of the jobs market in Alberta in your sector? So
that is truly going to be dependent upon the policies that are in place that are set primarily by our federal government. I think Alberta is trying to be helpful to the balance of Canada to make it an investable one. We all know that Canada is quite divided, or very divided at this particular time. Premier Kenney and his team, we believe, as well as Scott Moe and his team, are doing what they can do to support energy, infrastructure development, and job creation strategies. They are speaking to the what we'll call the fairness of the fiscal stabilization plan. I believe that as commodities get stronger, we have a clean regulatory environment, that we can actually, into the future, do what we possibly can for the benefit of all Canadians. There is a very significant amount of anxiety in this province, as well as the province of Saskatchewan, and I think in all Western Canadians. Unemployment in Alberta is second in Canada, only to Newfoundland and Labrador. Federal policies and rhetoric does not recognize the benefit that we do have, that the Canadian energy space brings natural resources developed in Alberta and Western Canada. But most of all, the upcoming throne speech is talked about in every coffee shop, in every room that we have in Canada. This is a time for Canada to be united, potentially, we will see, or even further divided. You know what? We think Alberta can do more, not just for the province, which is every man, woman, and child, but also for all Canadians. We just need to get the green light to do so from the federal government.
We're going to be right back after this break. We're talking to Mr. Grant Fagerheim of Whitecap Resources. Stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, with Mr. Grant Fagerheim. He is the CEO and founder of Whitecap Resources. Grant, we are talking about another aspect of this, which is the fact that Canada imports so much oil from foreign countries, foreign entities, and yet some of our own oil is available for that. So tell me about your vision about how we should actually trade and make sure that we have our own oil and gas available to more Canadians.
Yeah, I think that the main producing areas are obviously Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, but we also have offshore New Brunswick, Newfoundland that are very important for Canadian energy development from the oil and gas perspective. And I just want to talk about and note for everyone that just in Canada alone last year, we imported 240 million barrels of oil outside of Canada with a value of $19 billion. And my question would be, is it not responsible? Is it not the responsible thing to do to replace foreign oil with Canadian oil? We import about 700,000 barrels a day of oil, foreign. Yet we have to export our products into the United States, and we're targeting to get it to offshore markets to get better pricing as well. This would create more job opportunities in Canada, not just at the producing level or the service level, but if you look at refining, road construction, pipelines, terminals, offshore production platforms, gas stations. So we look at it that way. From a financial perspective, helping more Canadians with the financial difficulties that we're experiencing at this particular time as a result of not only the resource income, but the income, as I had spoken about earlier, from job taxation, personal taxation, corporate taxation, a much more effective manner to move forward. And if we truly are really focused on what we'll call this energy transition and climate, we should focus on having Canadian products produced firstly. It is, again, increasing the amount of Canadian production, the most responsibly produced in the world, would help the world to this, what we'll call climate change opportunities that people are talking about.
Yeah, what you're talking about, again, is replacing some of the dirtier oil or the oil that does not have the same technology attached to it with Canadian oil, which can be, from a green perspective, obviously better. You've touched on something we've talked about on this program before, which is the interprovincial trade barriers. We had James Moore as a guest recently. So that's really what you're targeting and saying, look, we've got to trade amongst ourselves better. Is that right?
I agree, totally. And that's, Tony, I think that, we have a responsibility for acting as Canadians, acting on behalf of all Canadians, from province to province, coast to coast, north and south, east and west. But we should be taking care of ourselves firstly. And that's when you break down these trade barriers between our provinces. we're so blessed to have the natural resources we sit on in Western Canada, in Eastern Canada, and we should be sharing with other Canadians from that perspective. And again, I want to come back to an environmentally responsible manner. I think that's the objective for all of us is emission intensity reduction, and I believe that we can do it with technology, with the advancing education that we find these young smart engineers and that are coming out of school. We have a marvelous future in front of us, and it'd be a shame if we squander it.
Grant Fagerheim, thank you for being a guest on our program. Very interesting topic, one that will continue to be of importance for all Canadians. Thank you for joining us today.
Tony, thanks very much for having me. Enjoy your day.
Would like to thank Grant Fagerheim again for being part of the show and to reiterate that his company, Whitecap Resources, is a net negative emitter. So it can be done. An oil and gas company that has negative carbon emissions because of all of the technology that is deployed for that purpose. So again, an Alberta company leading the way, the kind of thing that we need to see in our economy if Canada is going to be successful. We'll be following these stories in the future as well. So keep watching. Thank you for joining us.